Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When city rules clash with country grit, one stubborn farmer becomes an unlikely hero. Red Banner's quiet life erupts into war when a smug HOA dares to claim his land. But they picked the wrong man to bully. This isn't just a fight over fences, it's a battle for freedom. I have lived on this farm for more than 20 years, and in all that time, I have never once cared what some city-bred neighbors thought of my land. My name is Eldridge Banner, but everyone calls me Red, partly because of my hair back in the day, and partly because of my temper. This farm is not just dirt and fence lines. It is my bloodline, my father's sweat, and my own stubborn refusal to bow down to the greed of developers who see every field as a blank slate for another soulless subdivision. I thought I had seen it all, but I was not prepared for a homeowners association full of smug suburbanites who think they can tell me what I can and cannot do on land I have owned since before half of them learned to drive. The first time I crossed paths with Karen Furling, president of Clearwood Heights HOA, was at a county water board meeting. I usually avoid these local bureaucratic circuses, but there had been chatter about new water restrictions that might affect farm irrigation. So I drove my dusty pickup to the county hall, walked into a room full of people wearing polo shirts and fake smiles, and sat down in the back row. Karen was already there, standing at the podium like she owned the entire county. Her hair was one of those stiff blonde bobs that could double as a helmet, and her voice carried the same tone as someone lecturing a misbehaving child. We need to consider the aesthetics and property values, she was saying, especially with industrial-looking properties nearby. She glanced right at me when she said, industrial, as if my barn, which my father built with his own hands, was some rusted factory chimney belching smoke. I leaned back in my chair and let her words slide, at least until she smirked and added, frankly, I'm not even sure that farm is legally occupied. Does anyone know if that land is even zoned correctly? That was enough. I stood up, my boots clunking on the floor, and all eyes turned. Lady, I said, my voice carrying just as well as hers, this industrial property has been a family farm since before Clearwood Heights was a patch of grass. I own every acre, and I've got deeds older than your manicure to prove it. A few people chuckled under their breath, but Karen didn't miss a beat. She smiled that thin-lipped smile of hers and said, on paper maybe, but 20-year-old documents don't always hold up when a community evolves. Her tone made me want to laugh and punch a wall at the same time. Community, I said. You mean that cluster of cookie-cutter houses with the no color but beige policy? A couple of the board members tried to hide their grins. Karen's eyes narrowed like a hawk spotting prey. We'll see, she said. Some of us think it's time for a proper review of who owns what. I didn't answer her after that. Instead, I went home and poured myself a glass of bourbon on the porch, looking out over my fields as the sun set. The cows didn't care about zoning. The bees didn't care about aesthetics. And I sure as hell didn't care what Karen thought. But I knew, just by the look in her eyes, that this wasn't the last I would hear from her. 2 days later, I started hearing rumors through my neighbor Joe, who runs the feed store. You know that fancy HOA next to you? He asked, leaning on the counter. Word is they're filing complaints about your farm. Something about unsafe structures and being an eyesore. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my bag of grain. That weekend, as I was fixing a section of fence by the northern pasture, I saw Karen and a couple of her HOA lackeys standing just beyond my property line, pointing and snapping photos like they were on safari. I waved at them with the same hand I used to shovel manure. Karen didn't wave back. She just muttered something to the others and strutted off like she had just discovered a crime scene. I thought about walking over and setting the record straight, but part of me wanted to see how far she would push this nonsense. If she thought I was the kind of man who would roll over because someone in yoga pants decided my farm looked messy, she had another thing coming. My father didn't raise me to back down from anyone, especially not from someone who thinks property rights come with an HOA pamphlet and a fake smile. By the end of that week, I had my first official letter from Clearwood Heights HOA. It wasn't addressed to me as a neighbor or landowner. No, it was addressed like I was some trespasser, to whom it may concern, regarding the property adjacent to Clearwood Heights. I didn't even bother reading past the first paragraph. Instead, I tore the thing in half and tossed it into the fire pit. If they wanted a fight, they were about to learn that farmers fight differently. We don't send polite emails. We dig in, like roots. 2 mornings after that ridiculous letter, I was out by the barn feeding the cattle when a white county pickup truck rolled up my driveway like it owned the place. A man in a tan jacket stepped out, clipboard in hand, wearing a pair of sunglasses that looked more suited for golf than for inspecting anything on a farm. He didn't bother introducing himself before announcing, "We've received a complaint regarding zoning compliance. I'll need to take a look around the property." I leaned on my pitchfork and stared at him. "You got a warrant?" He blinked, clearly not expecting resistance. "A warrant? Sir, this is a standard inspection. I'm here to ensure your property complies with current county land use policies. You don't step a boot on my land without proper papers. That's not a suggestion." I took a slow step forward, letting him see that I wasn't joking. "What department did you say you're from again?" "Land use control," he stammered, shifting his clipboard like it could shield him. "We've had reports that your property may be partially allocated under a new community development plan." I laughed, one short, sharp bark that made my cattle turn their heads. "Allocated? You mean stolen, right? Tell me, was it Karen who reported that? Blonde hair, permanent scowl, and an HOA badge of honor?" His silence told me everything I needed to know. I pulled my phone from my back pocket and called the county sheriff right there. "Hey, Frank," I said when he picked up. "Got a fella here poking around my property. Says he's from land use control. Doesn't have a warrant. You mind coming by before I escort him off myself?" I could practically hear Frank rolling his eyes on the other end. "On my way," he replied. The inspector tried to keep a stiff posture, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. "There's no need for this, sir. I'm just following procedure." "Then your procedure's got holes big enough to drive a tractor through," I said. "You can wait in your truck until the sheriff gets here. Don't touch a damn thing." While we waited, I noticed movement near the property line. 3 of Karen's lackeys were standing there, phones out, pretending they were birdwatching. I walked to the edge of my land and called out, "Smile for the camera, folks. I'm sure this'll look great on the evening news." They scattered like spooked chickens, muttering something about evidence. Sheriff Frank showed up 10 minutes later, his cruiser kicking up dust as it rolled in. Frank's an old friend, the kind of guy who's seen enough nonsense to spot a setup from a mile away. He listened to the inspector's story, looked at me, and then at the clipboard. "You don't have an inspection warrant, and this land is clearly private property. I suggest you get the proper paperwork before you try this again." The inspector muttered something about coming back, but I cut him off. "Bring a lawyer while you're at it." After the truck left, Frank stayed behind, leaning against his car. "You know they're not going to let this go, Red. HOA folks think they're the law around here. They'll learn otherwise," I said. "Karen's playing games. She doesn't understand." By that evening, I started seeing my name pop up on local Facebook groups. Karen had posted a picture of my barn, claiming it was unsafe and a hazard to the Clearwood Heights community. The post was full of self-righteous comments about how that farm ruins the landscape. I replied with a photo of my deed and a note. "This land has been mine for over 20 years. HOA rules don't cross my fence line." Judging by the angry emojis and the silence from Karen, it hit a nerve. The next day, while I was repairing the fence on the west pasture, a drone buzzed overhead like an oversized mosquito. I stared up at it, then grabbed my shotgun, not to fire, just to make a point. I pumped it once, loud enough to echo across the fields. The drone did a quick U-turn and zipped back toward the neighborhood. I smiled, shaking my head. These people had no idea who they were messing with. Later that night, I called my lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Clara, who's handled every land dispute I've had in the past. I told her about the inspector, the HOA letter, and the Facebook circus. She just sighed and said, "Red, sounds like they're gearing up for a full-scale property fight. Start documenting everything. Photos, videos, conversations. If they want war, we'll give them one." A few days after the showdown with the inspector, things started getting uglier. I woke up early on a Thursday morning, as I always do, to check on the bees and walk the perimeter. Normally, the only sounds I hear are the low hum of the hives and the distant mooing of my cattle. But that morning, I heard the sharp, metallic clinking of tools where no tools should have been. I grabbed my jacket and headed toward the north side of the property, and that's when I saw it. A brand new metal fence, gleaming under the rising sun, cutting across 15 acres of my pasture like a knife through bread. For a moment, I just stood there, taking it in, my jaw tightening. The thing wasn't some flimsy wire. This was a full-on construction, posts set deep, panels locked together. On one of the sections, a shiny sign read, Future Clearwood Heights Community Park. My blood pressure shot through the roof. I didn't need a memo to know who was behind this. Karen and her crew had decided they didn't need permission to carve up my land. I went straight to my equipment shed, pulled out the keys to my old yellow bulldozer, and fired it up. The machine roared to life, louder than a tank in the middle of battle. As I rolled toward the new fence, I could already see figures gathering on the other side, residents from Clearwood Heights, some with coffee mugs in hand, watching like it was a free weekend show. Karen herself stood there, phone in hand, recording every second. I stopped the bulldozer just long enough to yell, "Karen, I don't recall inviting your HOA to build anything on my property." She gave me that plastic smile and shouted back, "You'll regret this, Red. We have permits." "Permits my ass," I muttered. Then I pushed the lever and the bulldozer lurched forward. The first section of the fence crumpled like tin foil. Metal screeched, posts snapped, and I made sure to level the whole stretch while the crowd gasped and screamed. A couple of the HOA's husbands tried stepping forward, but one look at the dozer's shovel and they backed off. By the time I was done, the fence was nothing but a heap of twisted steel on my side of the field. I parked the bulldozer, stepped down, and stared straight at Karen. "Next time you want to play architect, do it on your own property," I said, dusting my hands. Karen's phone was still rolling, and she shouted, "This is vandalism. We'll see you in court." "Good," I replied. "Bring your lawyer. I'll bring the truth." An hour later, 2 county officers showed up, no doubt called by the HOA. I led them to the property markers, which are older than Clearwood Heights itself, and explained what happened. After checking my deed and the survey records I keep in my office, the officers nodded. "Looks like this fence was on your side, Mr. Banner," one of them said. Karen's face went pale, but she still tried to argue. "He's lying. The community approved this." The officer looked at her like she'd just announced she owned the moon. "Ma'am, this land is clearly outside HOA jurisdiction. I suggest you leave before we file trespassing complaints against you." That shut her up for the moment, though she stomped off muttering something about her lawyers. That evening, a courier delivered a fat envelope straight to my front porch. Inside was the official HOA lawsuit. They were demanding a reassessment of my property boundaries, a total ban on livestock within community visual range, the removal of unauthorized structures like my barn and greenhouse, and, to top it all off, a compensation fee for damaging the reputation of Clearwood Heights. I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my coffee. It wasn't enough for them to trespass. They wanted me to erase my entire way of life because their cookie-cutter homes couldn't handle the sight of a real farm. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with Claire on the phone, going over the papers. "These people have lost their damn minds," I said. "Which is good for us," Claire replied, her tone sharp. "Every overreach they make will help our counterclaim. You keep everything documented, Red. We'll make them regret ever poking this bear." By the time I hung up, I had a plan forming. If they wanted a fight, I'd give them one, and I'd make sure the whole county knew exactly what kind of snakes were slithering behind those white HOA fences. A week passed after the fence fiasco, and I could feel the tension around here like a storm about to hit. Karen wasn't licking her wounds quietly. She was preparing for her next strike. I started hearing whispers around town, at the feed store, the gas station, even the diner where I grab breakfast on Sundays. People said that Clearwood Heights was spreading stories about my farm being unhygienic, a breeding ground for disease, and a threat to the neighborhood kids. The nerve of these people. My farm had passed every health and safety check for years, and now they were painting me like some outlaw hoarding rusted machinery and sick cattle. Then came the so-called offer from a man who reeked of sleaze before he even finished parking his shiny black SUV at the edge of my driveway. He introduced himself as an investor representing a private development group. The way he spoke, I could practically hear Karen's voice feeding him lines through an earpiece. He said things like, "We could help you retire comfortably, and your property could be turned into something that benefits the community." He even threw a number on the table, $450,000, to buy my land outright. I stared at him, letting the silence hang in the air until it turned awkward. Then I said, "You can tell Karen that I wouldn't sell this farm for $4 million, let alone your pocket change. Now get that car off my property before I tow it." He tried to smile through the rejection, but his jaw twitched. As he drove off, I memorized his license plate just in case I needed to remind the sheriff that certain snakes had been slithering around here. 3 days later, things got dirty. Literally. I woke up to find my water supply cut off. At first, I thought it was a busted pump, but when I checked the main line, someone had tampered with the valves near the county connection. It took me 2 hours to fix it, but the rage burned a lot longer than that. Later that same day, I got a call from the honey processor I've been selling to for over a decade. They were suspending my contract pending an inspection from the county sanitation board. I didn't need a detective to see the pattern. This had Karen's fingerprints all over it. I drove straight to the county office, paperwork in hand, and demanded an explanation. The clerk looked flustered, digging through files before finally admitting there'd been a complaint about contaminated water and unsanitary livestock conditions. "Who filed it?" I asked. She shook her head, saying she wasn't allowed to disclose that information, but she didn't need to. I already knew. When I got home, I called Clara. She didn't even sound surprised. "They're trying to choke your business so you'll have no choice but to sell. Typical HOA tactics." "They've got another thing coming," I growled. "This isn't a house with a white picket fence and a pool to regulate. This is a farm. My farm." That night, I sat down at my computer and wrote out a detailed timeline of every incident since the first HOA letter, the inspector, the fence, the bogus investor, and now this sabotage. I attached photos, videos from my security cameras, and even a screenshot of Karen's Facebook post where she called my land an outdated nuisance. Then I sent it all to Clara, who promised to draft a formal complaint and file harassment charges. I didn't stop there. I called in some favors from old friends who still have connections in local news. If Karen wanted to play dirty, I'd make sure the whole county heard how an HOA was trying to bulldoze a farm that had been here long before their cookie-cutter paradise. As I stood on my porch that night, watching the moonlight reflect off my fields, I made a silent promise. If they wanted war, I'd take it to them, step by step, until there was nothing left of their smug little campaign. It didn't take long for Karen to realize her sabotage wasn't scaring me. Instead, it only made me dig in harder, and she clearly didn't like that. The next week, I woke up to a scene that made my blood boil all over again. On the north side of my land, just beyond the tree line, a group of Clearwood Heights residents had gathered, cameras and phones out, as if they were scouting for more evidence of my so-called violations. A white SUV with the HOA logo was parked halfway on the road, hazard lights blinking, and there, standing at the front with her usual self-righteous posture, was Karen, wearing oversized sunglasses like she was running for office. I walked over, boots crunching on the gravel, and called out, "Morning, Karen. Planning another illegal construction project today, or are you just here to admire my cows?" A couple of her cronies laughed nervously, but Karen's expression didn't crack. "You think this is funny, Red?" she snapped. "We're tired of your refusal to cooperate with community standards. We've filed a formal lawsuit against you, and we'll win." She wasn't lying. A courier had delivered the paperwork the day before, and I'd spent the entire evening reading through it with Clara on speakerphone. The HOA wanted to redraw property lines, remove my livestock, demolish my barn, and pay them damages for, quote, devaluing the aesthetic integrity of Clearwood Heights. I'd almost choked on my coffee when I read that phrase. "Karen," I said now, "your lawsuit is a joke. The county lines are clear, the deeds are older than your subdivision, and you don't have a leg to stand on. But you do have a big mouth, and I'm about to shut it down." Her face turned red, but she tried to smirk. "You can talk big, but the court will decide, not you." "Good," I said. "Then I'll see you there, with my lawyer and a mountain of evidence." That afternoon, Clara drove out to the farm. She's not the type to waste words, and when she got a look at the HOA's demands, her jaw tightened. "They're overplaying their hand," she said. "I've seen bullies like this before. We're going to dismantle their case piece by piece. But first, we need to get ahead of their narrative." "What do you have in mind?" I asked. "Media," she said flatly. "They're trying to smear you online and in the community meetings. We're going to flip the script." By the next morning, we had a plan. I spent hours taking high-resolution photos of my farm, clean, well-maintained, exactly as it should be, and gathered old family records, including photos of my father and grandfather working the same land. Clara called a few local reporters she knew, and by noon, a news van was parked in front of my gate. The reporter, a young woman with sharp eyes and a notepad, interviewed me right there on the porch. "They're trying to erase a piece of history," I said into her microphone. "This farm's been here for generations. I don't answer to an HOA that popped up 5 years ago with nothing but paint swatches and complaints. If they want to fight, they'll get one." The segment aired that evening, and the response was immediate. My phone buzzed with messages from neighbors and old friends offering support. Even people from outside the county started sharing the story online. The HOA's Little Smear campaign suddenly had competition, and not the kind they could control. Karen, of course, didn't take this quietly. That same night, someone posted flyers around town claiming my farm was unsafe and infested with pests. I took one of the flyers straight to Clara, who grinned like a wolf. "Good," she said. Every false claim they make becomes another nail in their coffin. By the weekend, I knew the battle lines were drawn. The HOA was going to throw everything they had at me, and I was ready to hit back twice as hard. My farm wasn't just land. It was my identity, my history, and my future, and no HOA was going to steal that from me. The following week felt like stepping into a chess game where every move was designed to test my patience and resolve. Karen and her HOA weren't backing down, they were doubling down. On Monday morning, I noticed a convoy of county vehicles parked along the main road near my property. A team of people wearing reflective vests was walking my fence line, pointing, measuring, and jotting things down on clipboards. I approached them, hands on my hips, and asked, "What's the excuse this time?" One of them, a younger man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, cleared his throat. "We've been sent by the county zoning board. There's a formal complaint about unpermitted structures and non-compliance with the updated land plan." "Unpermitted structures?" I laughed. "That barn has been standing since before your parents were born, and I guarantee it's safer than half the junk built in Clearwood Heights." The crew looked uncomfortable. I pulled out my phone, recorded the entire exchange, and said, "Unless you have a warrant signed by a judge, you can walk that measuring tape right back to your truck." They hesitated, but eventually retreated, muttering that they were just following orders. I knew damn well whose orders those were. Karen was behind this, again, using every angle she could to pressure me. That evening, Clara came by to review the latest harassment. She brought with her a man named Jim Haley, a retired county judge who now worked as a legal consultant. Jim had the kind of calm, razor-sharp demeanor that told me he'd buried more than a few cocky HOA boards in his day. After skimming through the paperwork Karen had filed, he chuckled. "She's bluffing, but a persistent bluff can still cause damage if you don't counter it. We'll hit them with a counterclaim for harassment, defamation, and attempted interference with your business. That'll shake their foundation." While Claire and Jim worked on drafting our response, I focused on making my farm look pristine. Fresh paint on the barn, the grass trimmed low, everything in order. If Karen wanted to play the appearance card, I'd make my farm shine like it was ready for a magazine cover. But I wasn't doing it for her approval. I was doing it to show everyone else how absurd her complaints really were. On Wednesday, I decided to take the fight public again. With Clara's blessing, I called a local journalist who had covered the first segment on my farm. "Want a follow-up story?" I asked. "This time, I'll show you exactly how an HOA is trying to rewrite property lines to grab land they don't own." The reporter jumped on it, and within 24 hours, a camera crew was filming my fields, my livestock, and the historical documents, proving my ownership. During the interview, I walked them to the fence where Karen's illegal construction had once stood. "They're not just trying to control their own community anymore," I said, gesturing toward Clearwood Heights. "They want to take what doesn't belong to them. That's not a homeowners association. That's a land grab dressed up as community improvement." By Friday, the video had gone viral on social media. People from across the state were commenting, sharing, and tagging their own horror stories with HOAs. Farmers, ranchers, and even some folks from Clearwood Heights messaged me privately, saying they were fed up with Karen's antics. It felt like the tide was starting to turn, but Karen wasn't about to let me bask in public sympathy. On Saturday morning, I woke up to the sound of heavy machinery. I grabbed my boots, ran outside, and saw a landscaping crew unloading equipment near my driveway. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted. A foreman, looking just as confused as I felt, replied, "We were hired by the Clearwood Heights HOA to perform landscaping and cleanup. We were told this property was being incorporated into the community." "Not today and not ever," I said, my voice sharp enough to cut steel. I pulled out my phone and called Sheriff Frank. 10 minutes later, he arrived, took one look at the situation, and ordered the crew to leave immediately. "You boys don't want to get involved in this mess," he warned them. "This land isn't part of their HOA. Pack it up." Karen showed up in her SUV not long after, fuming. "You're obstructing community improvements," she accused, waving a folder of what she claimed were permits. I snatched the folder from her hands and flipped through it. It was all forged, badly forged at that, with half the county seals looking like they'd been copied from Google Images. "This is fraud, Karen," I said, "and I'm done playing nice." I called Claire on the spot, put her on speakerphone, and explained the situation. "Document everything," Claire instructed. "We'll present this in court as evidence of criminal trespass and forgery." That night, sitting on my porch with a glass of bourbon, I realized the conflict had escalated to a level I'd never imagined. It wasn't just about fences or lawsuits anymore. Karen had crossed into criminal territory, and I was ready to make sure the law came down on her like a hammer. The next week began with a gut punch of pure rage. I woke up at dawn, grabbed my coffee, and stepped outside to check on the cattle. The air was heavy and damp, the kind of silence that tells you something is off. Then I saw it. A bright orange excavator parked just beyond my southern fence line, its claw raised like it was ready to take a bite out of my pasture. Standing beside it, barking orders as if she was queen of the county, was Karen, dressed in her usual pastel power outfit and flanked by 2 private security guards wearing black polo shirts. I didn't bother walking. I marched, boots pounding the dirt like war drums. "Karen," I roared, "what in God's name is this now?" She didn't flinch. "Mr. Banner," she said, with that smug tone that could make a priest swear, "we're preparing for an expansion project. The HOA voted to reclaim unused land for a future community recreation area. This equipment will start leveling that plot today." I stared at her like she'd grown 3 heads. "This is my land. You don't reclaim what you never owned. Get this junk off my property before I turn it into scrap metal." Karen's guards stepped forward, puffing out their chests like they wanted to play soldier. "Sir, please lower your voice," one of them said. "We don't want trouble." "Then you've picked the wrong damn farm," I shot back. Without waiting, I took out my phone and dialed Sheriff Frank. "Bring back up," I said, eyes locked on Karen. "We've got trespassers, heavy machinery, and one HOA president losing her mind." While waiting for the sheriff, I pulled out my own camera and started recording every inch of the scene. Karen shouting about community rights, the guards pretending they had authority, and the excavator sitting there like a ticking bomb. 10 minutes later, the sheriff's cruiser rolled up, sirens wailing. Frank stepped out, his face already set in a scowl. "What is this circus?" he barked. Karen started waving her papers again, claiming permits and community approval. Frank took one look and said, "These are fake." "I'll tell you what, Karen, you've got exactly 3 minutes to get your people and your equipment off this property before I start writing trespassing tickets." Karen tried to argue, but Frank wasn't having it. "1 minute gone," he said flatly, tapping his watch. That did the trick. The guards muttered something about just following orders as they packed up, and the excavator was hauled out like a dog with its tail between its legs. That afternoon, Clara came by, and we sat at my kitchen table surrounded by stacks of documents, video files, and photographs. "This isn't civil harassment anymore," she said. "This is criminal. We'll file a police report for trespassing, forgery, and property interference, and we'll add these incidents to our counterclaim." I nodded, but Clara wasn't done. "We're going to need to make this bigger. The public already loves the idea of a farmer standing up to an HOA bully. Let's push this story statewide. I have contacts with the Arkansas Farmers Association and a couple of radio hosts who would love to sink their teeth into this." "Good," I said, pouring her a cup of coffee. "Let's make Karen wish she'd never heard of my farm." 2 days later, I held a press event right on my front lawn. Reporters from Little Rock, Fayetteville, and even a couple of regional TV stations showed up. I stood there with my barn as the backdrop and laid it all out. Karen's false claims, the fake permits, the sabotage attempts. "They think this land is some kind of bargaining chip," I said into the cameras, "but this farm isn't for sale. Not now. Not ever." The response was overwhelming. Within 24 hours, the story blew up online. People across the state were sharing it with hashtags like "I Save Banner's Farm" and "Mrs. AOL Bullies." Farmers from neighboring counties drove by to honk in support. A retired judge even called Clara to say he'd be willing to testify about the long-standing property lines if it went to trial, but Karen wasn't done throwing gasoline on the fire. On Friday night, just after sunset, I caught sight of headlights near my equipment shed. I grabbed my flashlight and shotgun, and sure enough, there were 2 men trying to shove concrete blocks across my driveway, effectively blocking access to my land. "Bad idea, boys," I called out. They froze like deer. One of them stammered something about community safety. "Community safety?" I snorted. "You're trespassing, and you're 1 second away from explaining that to the sheriff." I called Frank again, and within 20 minutes, they were cuffed and in the back of his cruiser. When Frank left, I stood in the quiet dark, looking at the barn silhouette against the moon. It wasn't just about me anymore. Karen had crossed too many lines, and now it was war. Next stop, the courtroom. And this time, I wasn't just defending myself. I was going for the jugular. The court date finally arrived like a storm I had been watching roll in for weeks. By the time I walked into the courthouse, the story had grown beyond anything I imagined. My farm had become a local symbol of resistance, and there were people standing outside the courthouse with signs that read, "Hands off Banner's farm," and "HOA bullies won't win." I gave them a nod as I passed, feeling that stubborn fire in my chest burn even hotter. Inside the courtroom, Karen sat at the plaintiff's table in a spotless white suit, looking like she thought she was on the cover of some lifestyle magazine. Her team of lawyers, 3 of them, each looking as smug as she did, sat flanking her, shuffling papers and smirking like they already had this in the bag. I caught her eye as I sat down beside Claire and Jim Haley, and for the first time since this mess started, I saw something flicker in her expression. Maybe it was doubt, or maybe she was just realizing that I wasn't backing down. The hearing started with the HOA's lawyers parading their so-called evidence. Photos of my farm, quotes about visual pollution, even a fake zoning map that claimed half my land had been reassigned to Clearwood Heights. Clara stood up sharp as a knife and started dismantling their claims one by one. "Your Honor," she said, her voice carrying across the room, "this farm predates Clearwood Heights by nearly a century. We have notarized deeds, historical surveys, and official county maps that have never changed. This is an attempt at land theft dressed up as a community complaint." Then it was Jim Haley's turn. The man may be retired, but he still had the commanding tone of a judge. He presented a series of satellite images spanning the past 20 years, showing my property unchanged and clearly outside HOA jurisdiction. He even had letters from county officials stating that Karen had submitted forged documents. The courtroom shifted. The smirks on the HOA lawyers' faces vanished, and Karen's perfect smile cracked. When I took the stand, I didn't hold back. I told the court everything about the fence they built on my land, the sabotage of my water line, the fake offers, and the attempt to block my driveway with concrete. "This isn't about community standards," I said, locking eyes with Karen. "This is harassment. This is fraud, and I won't let anyone, HOA or not, bully me off land that's been in my family for generations." Karen's lawyer tried to rattle me during cross-examination, suggesting I was uncooperative and hostile to progress. I just laughed. "Progress? You mean erasing a family farm to build a dog park nobody asked for?" The courtroom chuckled, and even the judge smirked behind his glasses. By the time closing arguments rolled around, the outcome felt like it was already carved in stone. Clara delivered the final blow. "Your Honor," she said, "the HOA is not only overstepping its authority, but actively attempting to rewrite property lines to serve its own interests. We ask that this lawsuit be dismissed with prejudice, and that Mr. Banner's counterclaims for harassment and property interference be upheld." The judge didn't take long to deliberate. When he returned, his ruling was sharp and decisive. The court finds in favor of the defendant, Mr. Banner, on all counts. The Clearwood Heights HOA has no jurisdiction over this property. Furthermore, evidence of forged documents and trespassing will be referred to the county prosecutor for criminal review. Karen's face drained of color as the judge continued. The HOA is ordered to pay Mr. Banner $210,000 in damages for harassment, legal fees, and property interference. The plaintiff, Ms. Furling, will be referred to a criminal investigation for forgery and obstruction. The gavel slammed, and just like that, the fight was over. Outside the courthouse, the crowd erupted. Reporters shoved microphones toward me, asking for comments, but I just said, "This isn't just my win. It's a win for anyone who's ever been bullied by people who think rules give them the right to trample others." I saw Karen being led out by her lawyers, her head down, and for the first time, she looked small, like all the bluster had finally drained out of her. That evening, back on my porch, I raised a glass of bourbon to the fields stretching out under the orange sunset. The air was quiet, the kind of quiet that tells you the storm has passed. I thought about my father, about the years of work poured into this land, and I knew he'd be proud. The next week, I installed a new sign at the edge of my property. Real land, real owner, stay out. It made me grin every time I drove past it. A few days later, I got a letter from the Arkansas Farmers Association inviting me to speak at an event about land rights. I agreed. If this battle taught me anything, it's that standing your ground isn't just about winning. It's about making sure nobody else has to fight the same war alone.